What's going on, beautiful J4 family and community? Hope everybody's doing well. Today is a special, special day. I'm hanging and chopping with my dear, dear friend of many, many moons and decades. We met in college on the ping pong table. I whooped him up, and since then we've been friends, dear, dear friends.
Okay.
Uh, but we went from college roommates living that college bachelor's life to now both of us are married with children. And so, Corey, I want to thank you for coming on the show to talk about raising biracial children. In your case, the configuration of Black and Hispanic children in a modern era. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. How are you, Jay? You good?
Man, I'm doing very well. Enjoying my empty nest project. I just took my last seed off to college, and so
Man.
I got some grown sons living in here. But for the most part, man, it's empty nest. It's rough over here, brother.
Well, I envy you, man. I got about 4 or 5 more years, so I got a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old. But you know,
All right. Well, let's start there, Corwin. What is what are the ages and genders of your children, if I don't you don't mind answering?
yeah. So I have two boys, man. I have a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old, and
Okay,
they're both
13 to 12-year-old. All
yep.
right. Now, what would you consider your children racially? You.
Man, you know what's funny, Jay? That you asked that question. Like, I'm sure if you asked their mom, she'd probably give you a different answer. I consider
Mm.
my kids. I mean, I know they're both Hispanic and Black, but I think because of how they look, and because I think they look more Black than anything else. I consider them to be Black kids who are Hispanic. But I think how the world sees them, I think the world sees them as Black kids. That's what I
Let,
think.
let's break that down. So I'm making a distinction, and I should have said that up front. So racially,
Yeah.
it's kind of a birth configuration, but culturally, is kind of how they identify. For example, I'm biracial. My dad's a Creole cat from New Orleans, Black man. My mother's from France, a white European woman, and so I identify as racially biracial, but I'm Black identifying. All my life has just kind of been in Black spaces, or at least after high school. So let me ask that again. Racially, what do you consider them? And if it's still the same, then beautiful.
Yeah. So racially, I guess if you break it down like that, racially, obviously I consider them Black and Hispanic, racially,
Okay. So biracial.
biracial,
All right.
absolutely.
But and then culturally, what would you consider them?
Man, I mean, it's so different. I mean, it's complicated at some level because I think they have both, but I think I probably would identify with them more with being Black, just because I think that's the dominant force in our house. Because
Hmm.
I'm Black, obviously, but I think that's how I see it. I guess my wife might have a different answer because she's Hispanic. She's Mexican. Her mom is from Mexico, and she's first generation here. But for me, culturally, I think they're Black kids culturally, but
Okay,
by
culturally.
yeah,
Yeah, even though I'm biracial and my wife is Black, uh, if I had to be very rigid in racial definitions, I guess my kids would be considered, and I'm learning all this language in this
yeah,
new
yeah,
biracial space, would be multi-generationally mixed. But culturally, if you were to ask them, I think they would all, to a T, all six of them, identify as Black. We never even had
yeah.
multi-generational mixed conversations sort of coming up, and maybe that's a generational thing, but they certainly would see themselves as Black. Did you and your wife even discuss identity when you were dating and courting and contemplating children? Did you even think about the dual
Man,
heritage that they'll have?
I think we probably did at times, but it was not a dominant conversation. I think we obviously we would have that conversation, um, but it was maybe low on the totem pole for us. We had so much more other issues to deal with as far as names and stuff like that. We were dealing with those kind of issues more so than
Hmm.
um, of that. But it's interesting because I think that maybe some people that is a big topic, but for us it really was not. So I think as they were born, and then we started dealing with the different cultural issues in terms of just like her culture, my culture, and certain things that were important to us that maybe wasn't as important to them, and vice versa. So that came
Hmm.
more to the forefront. But we have a very nuclear family. We don't really, I live with just my wife and my two boys, and so we kind of like define our own space at some
Right,
level.
right.
So I guess when we get into other if we go to separate family functions, then I think maybe it's more of an issue. But at
Hmm.
home,
Hmm.
it's just us, so it's our reality as opposed to being defined by others. You know.
Dopeness. For those of y'all just joining in, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're willing to let me know kind of where you're from, what your makeup is culturally, would love to know that. We're talking with Corin Towns, a dear friend of mine of many years, who is the father of two beautiful children who are of a black father and a Latina mother. Corin, growing up, man. Well, let me go back here. So you mentioned that you didn't really think about identity, maybe in the dominant sense that was sort of lower down the pole, but you did talk about names. In
Yes.
earlier videos, I do talk about names are certainly an identity marker, and should the family so choose, they can reference or represent culture. So where did you? And you don't need to share their names, but what was the name conversation like? Did you guys think of a power from that? Anything cultural from that?
So it's interesting. So I wanted my kids to have their own identity, have their own name, and not be beholden to
Mm-hmm.
my name, or my wife's name or whatever, as far as the first names goes, that's concerned. But my wife was more rigid about that issue. I think because of her culture, the name was a bigger deal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
As far as like my firstborn, named after me, that was a big deal for her. At the end, me,
Oh, your wife wanted that.
yeah, yeah, she wanted that. Yeah, she
Okay.
wanted, and I didn't want my son to be named Corwin only because I didn't want him to. I want him to create his own space. You know what I mean? I didn't want him to be tied down by my name. Be like, oh, my dad's name and whatnot. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
but that was just my take on it. But she felt stronger about her own, heritage, where the first son must be named, after the
Oh,
father. You know what I mean? It was more
okay.
traditional,
Okay.
a more traditional role than I was used to. I didn't really think about that, and I never really.
Mm-hmm.
It's still my son, whatever his
Right.
name is.
Right. But being in an interracial marriage, you acquiesce to
Yep.
cultural traditions and customs,
Yep.
and by virtue of that, your child, one of your sons, has a name that is actually a cultural
Yep.
continuity with the mother's heritage and tradition. That's powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even think about that until I think her mom and her had were going back and forth because her mom was like really involved in that part of the conversation with her. Like, it has to be, he has to
Mhm.
have his name, and I'm like, no, he doesn't. I didn't have
Mhm.
that.
Right.
It wasn't something that I thought about. But at the end of the day, I ended up going with that. And I think that was part of it because my wife's mom was really adamant about that. And then as a result, she was too. And so
Okay.
I didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other. So, you know, it ended up being, we went with that. So I
Hmm.
wasn't going to fight her on that topic.
Oh yeah, it's also part of a happy relationship, right?
Yeah.
Making,
Yeah.
learning and making some concessions. But yeah, I
Yep.
understand certainly wanting your children to have their own identity. None of my children have my first name. They have my oldest son in family tradition has my middle name,
Hmm.
and so we share that commonality. And then, as I talked about in previous episodes, they do have a cultural name, Corwin, in their name. So all of my kids have essentially four names, and the third one, sort of being a double middle name, is a cultural name. And so, if culture is something you want to affirm, what more of a way than to have it listed in their birth certificate and all of their identification, because they
Mm,
have to deal with it, resonate with it, every time they sort of say their name.
for sure.
Okay. Yep. So let me, if you were to ask your children if they are of age or even sort of conceptually have thought about it, what would they consider themselves culturally?
Man, you know what? It's interesting. I think if you'd asked them that question, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, because now again, one's 13, one's 12, they probably would say they don't know. You know what I mean? Because it
Yeah,
wasn't a
yeah.
topic. But society has a way of kind of like forcing you to
Mm-hmm.
choose.
Mm-hmm.
So now I think they probably would identify more with black now. I think they would say I'm black, even though their mom would say, no, you're both. You're Mexican and black. But I think
Uh-oh.
that,
So
you know,
so mama's like, nah, you better represent both, right?
yeah. Yeah, because well, she'd say because they are both. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So, but I just think it's probably easier for them just to say I'm black and be done with the conversation. So I think that's what they would say. You know, I think that's what they would say. Only because people like to put people in boxes. You know, I was like, wait, what?
Hmm.
Like, what are you, black? You know, so I think that they would say that now, recognizing that their mom is Mexican. You know, they know that. You know.
Would they? Is that a declaration in public spaces, for public spaces to sort of manage and move through
Yeah,
public
I think
spaces?
I think more public space. I guess that okay. That's why I would more of a public space than at home. I think at home they probably say you know they're both. They know that culturally. I mean they're Nana, their grandma. You know she's she speaks to them. Uses a lot of Hispanic word or Spanish words with them.
Hmm.
And so she's the cooking and things of that nature. The culture is really strong on my wife's mom's side, and so they get a lot of that, and they're used to it. They've grown up that way. Whereas me
Hmm.
on the other side, I don't, just try to make them good kids. You know what I mean? I don't really get
Hmm.
caught up to that, even though recognizing I am black and they know that, and that my family's black, and my mom, dad, and everybody else.
Hmm.
But they haven't had a lot of contact with my dad either, though. So because I don't really hang out with my dad at all. So they get
Right.
my family every so often. Every so often when my mom comes down and hangs out with us, or we go see them, for a funeral or something like that. And then they're around their other cousins and stuff like that. Like whoa, because they're not used to that. Of that.
Right.
So
Huh. So you mentioned Nana, the grandmas, certainly bring in, direct home from the motherland
yeah.
culture into the
Mhm.
family, language, cooking, those kind of things.
Yep.
So it's interesting. Would you say, Corwin, that at least from your, life lived with your wife, that there are demonstrations of culture that can literally be presented, manifested, actualized with the babies, to where do you have an equivalent blackness that you can actualize and manifest with the babies?
Man, so I mean, man, that's a tough one. Only because of my family dynamic. I live, because I don't have a lot of family here in Arizona. So whenever we have any type of family function, if you will, or culturally event, it's always private, perhaps more of the Hispanic side, because my family doesn't live here, so they don't go to many family functions like at Christmas time or
Right,
Easter, or things like that. You know what I mean? So it's always
right.
a one-sided deal because we just do whatever my wife's mom's family does. Whatever they do is
Mm-hmm.
cool. So at Christmas time, we're always we do Christmas on Christmas Eve. Where I grew up, Christmas was on Christmas Day. My
Mm-hmm.
wife's family, Christmas is the true Christmas is on Christmas Eve, and
Mm-hmm.
on Christmas Day you kind of like chill out and relax and don't do
Mm-hmm.
much.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Mm-hmm.
completely different than how I grew up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's no ham. They do more
Right.
like what do you call it? What are the little things my wife's family love? Not tortillas, but what?
Pastas,
No,
empatas.
they,
I know some. Starts with a T.
oh my God, what was that?
Tamales.
Tamales. Yeah, tamales are a big
Mm-hmm.
deal during that time
Mm-hmm.
period. Like my wife's mom family, they get together before Christmas and they make a whole bunch of tamales, and that's their family tradition. And now my kids know that tradition. They don't know that for me, Christmas was always about a ham. You know what I mean? Some mac and cheese and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and so they don't know that side. And so growing up, they've always had just that one side of it because we haven't really been at my mom's house for the holidays. If we were to go to there, they'd probably be like, "Wait, where are the tamales at?" You know what I mean? Because
Mm-hmm.
they've
Mm-hmm.
never seen that. So
Beautiful. What's going on, Mulatto Vanguard? How you doing, brother? Good to see you. I'm here chopping with my college roommate, who is the proud father of two biracial kids, Latino and Black. Uh, the area where we live, Phoenix, actually is predominantly Latino, just recent demographic. Although the state of Arizona is not predominantly Latino, it's 38% Latino. But where we live is definitely predominantly Latino. But it sounds like, Corn, that your kids are having a very biracial life, right? Even
yeah,
though
yeah,
pops would consider them Black, and they might
yeah,
consider themselves Black as they navigate spaces. But if you look at the cultural
yeah,
expressions,
yeah.
Any other examples of that? Do they speak the language? Are they
They
using
do.
certain?
So they're not fluent, obviously. Their mom would love them to be fluent, but you know, the, I think that's probably the main thing is just in terms of like all the traditions. Whenever we go to Mexico a lot, we vacation a lot in parts of Mexico, and so they really get a chance to see the culture a lot. And so they've always grown up that way. We always spend at least you know maybe 2 or 3 weeks a year in some part of Mexico every year, and so that's one of our go tos. And so they get a chance to interact with the culture, the true culture or whatever. And so, you know, um, you know, I think they would consider themselves. I mean, they're fluent in both areas in terms of they're able to go in both spaces. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
they can move,
Um,
right?
yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, right now they could go. I think right now they'd have an adjustment going to my family's house and back my mom's house back in Minneapolis because they're not used to seeing their cousins a lot. But once they're there, they're cool. They're able to find their comfort zone in that space, and then they're able to come back over here and they're able to go to Mexico and hang out there because they really have grown up in Mexico. We go to Mexico, like I said, every year. Uh,
Hmm. How
and
are they? How are they received in Mexico compared to maybe? Although our demographic is largely Latino, but is there a difference between national Mexicans and their
Yeah,
experiences in the
I
U.S.?
think they probably see more just as Americans. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, as anything else. But I think they probably consider them. Well, what's interesting when my wife is around though, when she's around with us, then we get a warm reception because it's like, oh, it's like, and she speaks the language, and so there's
Mm-hmm.
a really cool transition period. So we're able to engage and really have a wonderful time when we go to any parts of Mexico because my wife speaks the language fluently, and so she
Mm-hmm.
can have those conversations. And then we're able
Yeah.
to and that's wonderful when
Yeah.
someone speaks the language, man. I mean, it really helps you uh, have a really easier time as far as enjoying the culture and learning about the culture and things of that nature that you probably wouldn't find out if you didn't speak the language. So
Mm-hmm.
I was like my interpreter, even though I speak a little Spanish, but I'm not fluent.
Mm-hmm. Un
Have a
poquito.
conversation.
Un poquito.
Poquito.
Yeah, that's one thing in biracial families, right? You almost have this guide element, this navigating element, right? And
Yeah.
so your wife, if you're in Mexico proper and you got, your black presenting kids, you said they kind of favor
Yeah.
you in terms of the
Mhm.
melanin content, right? And
Mhm.
then so y'all are a tourist having a visit to Mexico, but then wife comes in and she immediately cuts through all the cultural
Oh
nuances,
yeah,
kind
man.
of legitimizes everything.
I think, Jay, I'll tell you this. I think that because of her ability to speak the language over the years, we've had perhaps, in my opinion, a better time, a greater time because, we were able to go and enjoy and do things that perhaps other folks don't get a chance to do because we speak the language or she speaks the language. And
Hmm.
then we're able to cut through a lot of that stuff that you get, where they tell you the tourist stuff. Hey, my wife said, hey, where should we really go eat? What
Yeah,
should we really go do? You know what I mean? All of a sudden, oh, okay.
authenticity. Yeah,
Yeah, and you just have a more authentic time. That's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of, as a parenting channel, we love to have strategies and themes. This is a channel about parenting black and biracial children here more recently. But what Corman is articulating is that whatever the dual heritage is, especially if not only if it's tied to a country, right? Blackness is tied to Africa, but Africa is generationally speaking, we don't know the modern representation of blackness, how if it even has any connection or awareness to that. So the family connection, the cultural connection tends to be here domestically and then often regionally. And there's certainly cultural nuances that go with regions. You think about the South, the East Coast, and the Southwest. But in the case of your wife, or for those parents, if you have a parent that's connected to a country, connected to a language,
Yeah.
then it is almost due diligence, almost an absolute necessity that you expose your beautiful babies to that rich side. Because in many ways, problematically and unfortunately, black kids or black biracial kids, black white biracial kids don't have necessarily that connection to a mother continent. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, you know what? I think I never thought about it like that, but yeah, I agree with you. I think just growing up because they've always been able to experience authentically Mexico at some level, parts of Mexico. It really has enriched them as kids. I think they're more well rounded because of their
Mm-hmm.
abilities. to be in that space and be comfortable and not feel like they're
Mhm.
outsiders, if you will. They feel like, I think they feel at home. Perhaps if you were to ask them when
Mhm.
they go, they're very comfortable in Cabo San Lucas or in Rocky Point or in Cozumel, or
Mhm.
whatever. We go to those places a lot, and so I think they benefit from that. And I think whereas I don't know if my wife was not Hispanic, I don't know if I would vacation as much and we'd go as much. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
so I definitely think they're more well-rounded because
Yeah.
of that experience.
Or if you went, you would go as travelers, not as family members, right?
Was that
If you went, you would go as travelers and not as family members, right? There's a
correct?
different experience when you
Yeah,
go to your home country, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, definitely, parents, you ought to seriously consider traveling, just not necessarily to home countries, but just traveling for the sake of world exposure for ourselves, but also for what our children can see. In many cases, they'll see experiences and cultural interactions and dynamics that give them a sense of new insight. It gives them a sense of comparison. It gives them a sense of beauty in other kinds of cultures, and ultimately leads to an appreciation to humanity and culture at large. But if they can have a mama homeland, a daddy homeland kind of cultural experience, then it becomes ancestral, right? Then it becomes almost like DNA and heritage, right? And I
Yeah.
imagine that there's robustness for how they see themselves.
It does. It's fun to because like, one of the things I want to do. I've been wanting to do the same thing because I consider myself. I think I probably told you a long time ago that I grew up in the South, and I think I got a lot of my identity from the South, where my father lives. Even though my dad and I are not on good terms right now, but my family that's there, that family, that culture, that Southern culture. If you were to put a gun to my head, I'd say that's how I became who I am today, as far as just that how I grew
Hmm.
up, food wise, things I like to eat, vegetables, things like that. It's that culture
Hmm.
from down south, and I would love to take them there so they can experience that because I think that's where I got my identity from for the most part. And my mom, even though she lives in Minneapolis now, but she's from the South also. So my
Hmm.
family is really on both sides is from the South. A lot of
Hmm.
the traditions, the foods that we eat, it's southern. Everything is southern. So I would think, Memphis, Arkansas area. That's where my family's from. So I want to take them there so they can experience that, so they can have that same feeling that my wife's family is giving them when they go to
Yep.
Mexico. I think we'd have more of
Yep.
that, because they'd see, oh, this is where Dad grew up. He actually was
Hmm.
born here. This is the
Hmm.
grandmama's house. My other grandmama's house. Oh, this is my
Hmm.
cousin's house. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think they would benefit from having that. And I think at some level, I think I've cheated them of that only because just because our family dynamic, my dad and I just didn't, get along. So I didn't kind of at some level didn't want to go there, even though I have lots of cousins and
Yeah.
aunts and stuff like that that are there, to this very
Yeah.
day. So
Yeah. I do want to ask you a question about your
mhm.
pops and more so how you're raising your children. But I do want to say shout out to those listening in. Appreciate you guys coming over to check out J4 Conversations. If you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the boxes here. But staying on the southern visit, I just took a New Orleans trip with my dad, man, a father-son trip, and we didn't have a Bourbon Street experience, man. We had a Seventh Ward, Third Ward
Yeah.
experience, man. Only went to a restaurant twice. We got straight up auntie cousins cooking, man. It was beautiful. Had a chance to go to the Mardi Gras parade, and with the Indians parade, um, the Mardi Gras Indians, right? I mean, I'm talking
Yeah.
about full regalia in the Seventh
Yeah.
Ward,
Yeah.
right there with the people. And then I've also, especially as a young kid, I spent some summers in Gary, Indiana, where my dad grew up, man. And
Mm.
so that experience was undeniable for me in terms of seeing that part of my family. And then I lived in Italy for about 3 years when I was 9 years old to 12, and we would catch the train, and I would go see my mother's people and have a fully French immersed kind of experience. And even though I would still say I'm culturally leaning black, I can't deny the influence and the framework that both France, New Orleans, and Gary kind of did for me.
Mm.
But I will admit this as a very light skinned guy, I'm not the darkest brother in the world, Corin, if you didn't
Yeah.
know.
Mhm.
Um,
I didn't know that.
going, yeah, yeah, coming from a military, very diverse environment, and then hanging out in Gary, Indiana, all black city, man, it was an adjustment for me
Yeah.
at first. Yeah,
Yeah.
for one, I had never been, in an all black space. And then I
Mhm.
felt like this walking exclamation point, just because of how light I was. But, I just had to get out there. Like you said, your sons could probably, when they get there, they could adjust, but it'll be an adjustment for them, man. Or what do you think? What do you think as biracial kids, going into a predominantly Southern, largely black populace, how they might navigate?
Well, see, that's the thing. I think there'll be an adjustment, obviously, and I'm sure there'll be people would be fixated on initially on the outward appearance because it is. I mean, I would say to you now, growing up, I'll tell you this much. I also had a very similar experience. Like I was probably the lightest in my family, so I got a lot of that what's the word for it? Like cousins always give me a hard time. You know what I mean? Because they, I didn't understand it. So I think that my kids may initially because that's all they see is the outward appearance. They may say, why is he so light? Because they're lighter skin, but
Right.
at the same time too, I think they talk different. Obviously, that's another issue. That Southern slang and
Mm-hmm.
black folks down, and believe it or not, this they speak different than out
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's funny whenever I have any opportunity to talk to any of my cousins from down there, like, man, listen how he talks. He talks so different. So I think the fact that they're different and they'll
Right.
have to, but there'll be a time period where they say, why are they focusing on how I talk? So I think they'll have to adjust to that. But over time, I think they'll have a beautiful time with my family. So I do think it will benefit them. Maybe initially they'll be a little bit uncomfortable because they're not used to them and not used to that whole culture. But
Mm-hmm.
overall, I think they will benefit from it overall and have a better understanding of where I'm from and what I'm about because of that
Mm-hmm.
Southern culture. Because that's really is what I would say, at the heart of, at the end of the day, a lot of the traditions that I have are from the South. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's powerful what you're saying. So I was born in 1968.
mm,
It's when at the beginning of college, I intentionally went there where we met and
yep.
decided to get out of the proverbial biracial gray and just to land within a blackness. And this was in 19 mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And the pathway to a blackness seemed very evident and obvious to me. But here more recently, when I've had some discussions around biracial, I've discovered another community of biracial folks who are asserting a dominant identity, a sort of biracial and proud. And this is also juxtaposed to some other things I'm seeing where the biracial community itself, I mean, the black community itself is saying biracial folks ain't black. And I didn't know, Corey. And this was tripping me out. It was bugging me out. And so I've done
Yeah.
several videos in this space. But in my day, I'm talking 1976 or something like that, when I would go
Mm-hmm.
visit my grandfather by myself to spend time with him and Gary. To me, it was a rites of passage of sorts that if I was going to consider myself even biracially, black and white, but if I certainly was going to consider myself to be a part of a blackness, I had to go head forward into black spaces
Yeah.
and hold my own and see how I could fare.
Mm.
Today's generation is articulating that the gatekeeping of that, the controllers of black spaces have created such a barrier to biracial admissions that they're choosing to assert themselves in different ways. But in my day, it was like, nah, if I'm gonna represent my daddy, I got to go be in black spaces and figure out how to hold my own. And so it it has a rites of passage element to it. That even sounds a little odd to say, but what do you think there?
Well, it's interesting because like one of the things I want to do, and I don't, and I think I hear what you're saying. I think there's some validity to that because like one of the things that I'd like to do, like both my sons, they want to go hang out with my on my mom's side of the family for a summer, and I have yet to let
Mm-hmm.
them do that. Only because they say they want to go, and I'm like, okay, let you go up there and hang out. My cousins are different. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a different
Mm-hmm.
world, and I don't know. I think they'd be fine initially because my mom would try their best to protect them, but at the same time too, you say you're hanging out in black spaces. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
they're so your kids are probably the same thing. My kids are a little bit more protected, have been protected. You know what I mean? And we kind of control their environment. Whereas if you go up to especially on my mom's side, it's a free for all. You're gonna see all kind of stuff that they're gonna have to
Mm-hmm.
navigate their
Mm-hmm.
way through that space, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And I don't
So, so,
know,
so, so,
you know.
Cole, just to name it, right? You and I both left where we grew up at.
Hmm.
Both of us were first generation kids.
Hmm.
In my case, my hero, my champion was my dad. In
Sure.
your case, that was your mom, right?
Mhm.
I
Yep.
had kind of this tumultuous relationship to my mother. You had an off and on tumultuous relationship with your pops.
Correct.
Both of us saw the advancement path through education,
Yep.
and you and I both have kind of maximized it. You're in the professional
Yep.
space when it comes to education, and now your kids are benefiting from a socioeconomic reality that's vastly different than the one you grew up
Oh,
in, right?
absolutely.
And so they have this kind of greenish element to them, right? This kind of
Yeah.
socioeconomic
Yep.
guardrail around
Yep.
them, right? So yeah,
Yep.
but then you're gonna put them in the community, right? And then they got
Grandma.
the culture. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But but we want to protect our babies, and we certainly want to, talk about safety. But in the community, there's beloved beauty and mamas and grandmamas embrace, but there's also bullshit. Right? There's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
bullshit
Of course.
that that they'll have to contend with. So
Of
maybe you
course.
got to do it in baby steps, Brett. You got
Yeah,
to do
and
it in baby
that's what I thought. Maybe a week or two, but not the summer. You know, they gotta come back. You know what I mean? Especially on my mama's side.
Oh my goodness.
So on my mom's side, it's more or less a lot of bullshit, right?
Yeah,
On my
yeah.
dad's side, it's they're more Southern Baptist. You know what I'm saying? Grow, the church. You're going to church, 4 days a week. If you're down
Mm-hmm.
there on that side of town, my mom's side not so much. You know what I mean? It's a
Mm-hmm.
party every other weekend. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's house doing something crazy. And so it's like I don't know if my kids. My mom would do her best to protect them, but I think I need to be there just to make sure that nothing crazy they get exposed
Mm-hmm.
to. You know what I mean? But at the same time, too, now they're older, they're gonna have to deal with that, and like you said, find their way through that. I think it would be like almost like a rite of passage for them, because even though it would be with family, but there's a lot. I mean, when I say family, that's a big word. Family. I'm talking about cousins that I don't even know, cousins that ain't my cousins,
Yep.
but they call
Yep.
themselves.
Yep.
We do it, and
Yep.
so I do think it would be beneficial for them, like I said, in baby steps maybe. But they've been asking me right this summer they want to go, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe a week here too. I want to stay with my Uncle Cedric for the my brother Uncle Cedric for the summer, not with Grandma Flora because I want to go fishing. I want to do all this other stuff they wants to do, but I just
Mm-hmm.
don't know if they could handle a big block of that without maybe a week here, then 2 weeks, then
Mm-hmm.
maybe just gradually. But it would be, I think, something that would benefit them over time. So
Yeah, man. So this is
I'm
this is
still
very
skeptical, but I'm open to the idea
yeah,
of
yeah.
some part of that. You know.
So yeah, this is very reflective.
So,
Let me ask you this, Brad. Would your family,
mhm.
would they consider your kids black or biracial?
Biracial, I'm sure. And they probably wouldn't tell me that, but I'm sure they see them as biracial, like only because they didn't, how because it's a different lifestyle, at every level, culturally. They really are growing up. My family said, well, you've grown up. The kids have grown up more or less with her side of the family than our side of the family. So which is
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic, Mexican, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's how they price it. My wife's family, culturally, all the things they do, and so even though they would feel differently than I would, they said,
Mm-hmm.
well, I think that's how they would see them more or less Hispanic dominant. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would say
Mm-hmm.
that they would probably say them is Hispanic first, then black. Although they look like me, but culturally, I think they would say they don't have much of our culture at all because they haven't been around us all the time. They didn't
But
grow up with us, even though we see them, from time to time. But growing up, I think my mom would say that. I think my brothers would say that.
but
So
isn't that interesting though, right? I
is that
know you're
interesting,
new
or
to
is that
this
different? Is that
conversation.
how you? What about your side of the family? How about you?
That's a
Yeah.
great question, right? Um, in my mind, generationally, I would say they would see them as black. They might have some nuance around the color dynamic, the cultural dynamic,
Mhm.
but black. But having been in this space now for about 3 or 4 months, and I know you're just new to the
Mhm.
scene. What you're describing is a very biracial experience, right? The fact that in 1975 or so, when I was in Gary, I didn't pose the question as to what do they think I am. I asked the question to myself, what do I think I am? Right. And I acknowledged a biracialness, but I also acknowledged that I was in a process of
Mm-hmm.
self immersion into a blackness, right? I never paused to ask the question, how am I being seen? And nor did I pick up cultural cues or direct messaging, from black cousins and black friends. I played baseball out there and everything. I did get a sense of uh, who did I think I was, right? And once I kind of showed a sense of want and desire to be a part of a black experience and black connection, then I found my pathways in small friendship groups. But I never asked the question as to what do they think I am, right? That's very interesting, because both you and I are saying we see our kids as black, but in many cases, in your case, the life lived is a very bicultural experience, particularly because of the proximity of Mexico to Arizona. Hmm, interesting. Corin, I don't know if you froze right there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm
Okay.
back. There you go. Yep. Yep. The last part of
Beautiful.
the question, can you repeat that last part of the statement or question you made about?
Yeah. That you and I see our children as black, but particularly in your case, because of the
Yeah.
proximity of Mexico and the number of times they go there, they're having a very biracial kind of experience, huh? Or
Yeah.
bicultural experience.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Those of y'all listening in,
Well,
thank you
see,
so much. Go ahead, Britt.
go ahead, Jay. No, no, I
Those
agree
of
with you. I think that they are having a, but what's interesting is that I think if, from my family standpoint, they would see it as a one-sided. You know what I mean? I think my family
mm,
would, even though I'm black, I'm the father. So, but I think because of their lack of you know, hanging out with them on a more consistent basis, they would think they're getting a one-sided part of the culture, even though that's not true. But I think that's how they see it. I think that was your question initially: is how would my family see
right.
them culturally? And that's
That
what
would
I would
see them
say.
one sided. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah. And maybe because of choices of parents make, the
yep,
youth, the children are then they got to deal with their generation, right? Even if it's
yep,
family or not. And then they're going to have some kind of assessment or evaluation or sense of belonging. And because of our decisions for what we expose them to, they then inherit a relationship to a monolithic black culture. And then they have to interpret that, right? They have to
yep.
interpret whether or not they see themselves there. My generation, I never asked the question, was there something else to consider? But today's generation, for whatever reasons, they're the current representation of mom and dad's influence and exposure. But if they feel any kind of way, and I want that to be the next question, have they experienced any angst or anxiety in the identity dynamic? But they might say, I don't feel quite acceptance here, and I'm on a pathway to something different. Have uh have your kids articulated in their own language and age appropriate ways frustration or challenge in the space of identity that you picked
You
up
know,
on?
it's interesting. I think going back to when especially my youngest son, when he first started school, he went to a predominant white school, right? And all he knew is that he didn't have hair like the other kids, and he'd always say he wanted, hair like the other kids. And I'm like, man, listen, I don't think that's going to happen. So he
Mm-hmm.
had an issue with that, and I think only because he saw himself as not like the other kids. Even
Mm-hmm.
though I would try to say, yeah, but that makes you cool. That makes you, your own. And so he had a harder time with that issue, and so he always wanted to, uh, just he wanted to be similar. And now he's comfortable in his own skin and not. He recognizes that he's different. Even though the school they go to today is a multicultural school, which that's a whole other topic. I'll talk to you about in a
Mm-hmm.
second. But
Mm-hmm.
but at their initial school, he was different. He was probably the only, and maybe there's 4 or 5 black kids in the entire school. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So that was hard for him because he didn't see anyone who looked like him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as the years went on, there became more of black kids in the school, and so even though it still was a predominantly, I'd say 70% white school, but to see someone else like yourself helped them be comfortable with who they were. You know what I mean? Both black
Mm-hmm.
kids. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Even though he still would be, let's say, maybe there's 2 black kids in the class, and 16, white kids and 2 Hispanic kids or 2 Mexican kids. But
Mm-hmm.
someone who was not part of that dominant culture was kind of, I think, a refreshing thing for them, and it helped them
Mhm.
adjust. And so, but initially, my youngest son definitely had more time with that. He saw that he was different, even though
Yeah.
we talked about that. But he, why did they have hair like this? Why do I have hair like, I don't have hair, but you know what I'm saying? They would be,
Mhm.
why is my hair different than their hair?
Mhm.
Why is my skin darker than their skin? You know what I
Right.
mean? Your skin's
Right.
beautiful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Now,
um,
have you and your wife made decisions based upon their identity dynamics, like where you pick schools, what neighborhood you chose to live in, what you get them involved with? Have you taken into consideration a dynamic of proximity? Because representation is critical initially for social bonding, and when you're in spaces, the highest level would be gender. The next level might be race. Then down below that might be ethnicity, and then you could keep drilling down to sexual orientation and whatnot. But kids initially look for representation of themselves in spaces, and in absence of it, they can feel isolation, and in abundance of it, they feel that it's common and almost normalized. Did you make choices about living, school, those kind of things based upon
well,
identity?
you know what, Jay, I'm gonna tell you a true story. So we moved. So about 2.5 years ago, we moved to Awatuki. Okay, some
Hmm.
people call it White Tukey. We
Yeah.
moved up here, up in the mountain up here, and but we kept the kids over the schools they were in at our old house for like the last year and a half. But that got tiresome, and I decided to move them to over here to where we live. Now I live,
Hmm.
over here off Elliott I-10 or Elliott,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
and
I'm seeing your columns in the back there.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
seeing your
So
columns.
so say I'll say so I said, okay, fine, you're gonna go to school over here where you're supposed to go. It's close to the house. School's about a mile from here. So we both put both the kids, sixth grade, eighth grade, into school, Centennial Middle School over
Hmm.
here in Phoenix. I live in Phoenix, and I didn't know this until I went about 3 weeks ago. We went to the what do you call it? The home. What do you call it? The first day meet the teacher session,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I've never seen more minorities in a school ever,
Hmm.
and it's
Hmm.
literally about a mile from my house. Now
Hmm.
over here, I'm not sure where the kids live at because we don't see
It's
these kids.
busing. It's busing.
The teachers are black. Like my son came out and said, "Dad, I got 3 black teachers." Like my youngest,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and so by accident, I guess at some level, and to answer your question, they're in a multicultural school that I love. Now they're seeing people who look like them, not just one or two. I'm saying like, I don't know what the
Hmm.
numbers are. I would imagine it's probably at least 60-40.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Which I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And had I known that, I probably would have put them over before. I didn't know that. I
Hmm.
assumed went to school right here.
Yeah.
So lived in this area, I should say. But
Yeah.
every day,
Well,
like, oh my gosh, my teacher's black. Oh my gosh, this person, and it's a different experience, and they're
yeah.
loving it. They're
And
loving it.
they're beginning to shine, and they're going to begin
Yeah,
to lift up because they have older role models who are representative of a diversity, and in some cases, themselves. Only 2% of teachers are black men. We don't have any data on biracial teachers,
mm,
but because of a very odd dynamic, not odd, but a busing situation where you take families who live in predominantly segregated or predominantly black and brown Latino neighborhoods who
mm,
also want the best education for their children,
yeah,
send them to school districts with higher performance. And in our area, that's Kyrene, and then here more recently, even in the Awatuki space, which are predominantly white communities,
yeah,
but because the population is aging out, they need to bring in enrollment increases, and so we have an open enrollment in Arizona, and so you have a lot more diversity coming into these predominantly white spaces, which is of tremendous value for the small percentages of multicultural black biracial families that live there because of social economic circumstances, but their kids have the benefit of adoration and care from a diverse set of teachers and students. So you
Well,
lucked out on that, brother.
I did luck out because like so my kids is Kyrene School District. So I don't
Hmm.
know if you're familiar with
Yeah,
Centennial, but
one of my yeah.
what you're saying is exactly what's going on here. I didn't know that, so
Hmm.
I was shocked. My wife and I went to the meet the teacher, and I'm like looking around, like, what is going on? I'm
Yeah.
like, I mean, it's weird because like it's wonderful for them, and then I thought they were gonna have a harder time adjusting because it's a new school, new area, and they're loving it. It's been two and a
Hmm.
half, and they're like, Yeah, Dad, I like the school here. My oldest son like loving it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
Mm-hmm.
even my youngest son, they're, the different names of the kids that they're, hey, I met, DeAndre or whatever. You know what I mean? Names that I hadn't heard in a while. At schools.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? So it wasn't
Yeah.
like it wasn't intentional, but that's what it ended up being. So that's why I
Yep.
was like, what? And I had to learn about the whole busing thing, that what's happening with this school. And
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in a slightly different situation. So you live on one side of the mountain. I live on the other side of the mountain,
mhm.
which is historically the segregated after white flight in the 60s. It became a predominantly black city. Later on, Latinos moved in. And now, through gentrification and multi generational housing, you're beginning to see white folks sort of come back into space. So I chose to live in a neighborhood or a part of town that was statistically larger black and Latino, but I too sent my kids to sort of smaller public institutions where the diversity was not at the level you're talking about, but I was able to balance it out because visibility, presence, seeing themselves
Yeah.
in either neighborhood or school was critically important to me. So, man, I'm real glad y'all landed in on a gem there. Uh,
I'll tell you this, Jay, and we'll be done with it. But I didn't know the importance of it truly to what level until the last 2.5 weeks that I'm seeing
mm,
a spark in their step about how they're more comfortable. You know what I'm saying? They're more
mm-hmm,
comfortable, I was like, okay, and, I'm like every day, Dad, I like the school here. Like, I'm
mm-hmm,
thinking I got to deal with the whole adjustment period. They're like, nah, this is cool. Miss Wilson is, my youngest, she's a black lady who she
mm-hmm,
emails me all the time. My son,
mm-hmm,
it's a different experience, man. And it's like they're loving it. I'm loving it. It's close by the house, and they get a chance to interact with folks who look like them on a higher number basis. And I think it's a definitely a positive thing for them, um, at least in my mind, and that I
mm-hmm,
think they'll definitely benefit from because they weren't getting that at their old school, even though their old school was a great school. Both of their schools
mm-hmm,
they were great schools, but for whatever reason, that busing thing that you're talking about wasn't happening as like it is over here. I
mm-hmm.
would got something else going on.
Yeah.
I'm not, you said maybe none of the kids go to school here. Maybe like in my neighborhood, I don't see any of the kids outside of my one neighbor behind me. None of the kids I see go to school there. They all
Mm-hmm.
go to private school. They go to Brophy, and then they go to another school or whatever. So a lot of the kids go to private school over here. Whereas my kids, obviously, I'm fine. I love Kyrie School District, and I
Yep.
love my
Yep.
kids going to school over here.
Yeah.
So
To
yeah,
your
man.
point. Yeah. To your point, Corin, about seeing adult figures who represent them. It was a black male teacher in the seventh grade, I think it was, that sort of helped me come into my own. As I said before, man, back in the day, I used to comb my hair forward, Corin. It looked ridiculous, man. But this little afro forward looking kind of thing. And he pulled my coat. He said, "Man, you need to get you a cut." He was talking about the importance of biracial kids who phonetically, how they present black is through their hair. He said, "You need to get you a proper cut, man." And at that time, it was a shag. And so he helped me get my first shag, and my little stuff was slow, got a little bigger, and had that long wave on the back. Oh man, that shag, man, it just lifted up my confidence. I started to get recognized more by the ladies. And man, I just kind of perked up, got a little overly confident, whatever the case may be, man. But it's that understanding of black men and women to black boys and girls, or even biracial black and other, that can cut right to it, man, and touch them in the spirit, touch them in the heart. And that's why it's so critical, parents, that if we have biracial children and of course monolithically black children, that we get them in front of other adult figures who can know the language without talking to them, man. The babies need that. And as parents, we got to try our darndest to give them opportunities to be around folks who kind of understand them without even saying a word. Corin is doing some technical dynamics. For those of y'all listening in, thank you guys so much. Feel free to make a comment or to ask a question. We're getting ready to wrap up here. I do have one question to ask Corwin should he come back in. But in the meantime, thank you guys for listening in. We're dealing with parenting biracial children. In this case, Corin is the father of two boys. uh, in their teens, early teens, who have a beautiful Latina mother, and my man Corin, beautiful brother, dad. Corin, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So, Jan, I heard everything you're saying on that last topic. So, I can tell you this: on what you're saying is absolutely true. So, I know this much: the first time that both of my kids have ever had a black teacher was 2 weeks ago, and they've been in school
Mm,
obviously since they were
mm,
5 years old, and they
mm,
both commented about how I think they have multiple teachers who look like them, and they had
mm-hmm,
never had that before. And even I had never
mm-hmm,
thought about that, in
mm-hmm,
terms of that until they told me about it, and I saw it with my own eyes. I'm like, hey, Wilson is black. And then we go to
yeah,
another school, another class, because we
yeah,
on the first day of the meet the teacher, we go to the different classes. And I'm like, I was mesmerized. I was happy in all those things. And so it's weird how they picked up on it right away. They did, and they benefited from it, and they love it.
mm-hmm,
And so everything you're saying about looking like them, the comfort, being comforted by that fact that you have folks who look like them who are teaching them in school. My son's math teacher is a black lady, and
mm-hmm,
loves that. You know what I mean? So they're commenting on that because they see not so much like it's like something they demand, but it's nice
yeah,
to have that. I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
and that's one
yeah.
thing.
You don't know what you don't know, right? And so
Yep.
parents are the know source, KNOW, and whatever we can do to give them exposure. The way the society is, and especially the way Arizona is, where of all the interracial couples, 25% of them are coupled, clustered in the Phoenix and Tucson area. So there's a lot of interracial couples here, but also they'll likely see some teachers who at some point will have some appearance of biracialness or multi-generationally mixed. And I don't know if they'll lock in on that, but randomly or informally, they're just seeing that. And visibility can be taken for granted. But
Yeah.
for people of color who historically live in predominantly white spaces, that means something. There's currency
Yeah.
to seeing yourself in the populace.
Oh
Beautiful.
man. It's something that it's something that you can't appreciate until you're actually in that space, right? And you're doing that because I don't think I ever really thought about it very much, in my decision making process with my kids. I just wanted them to go to the best schools I could, find to
Hmm.
go to. But now that they're in a good school and they have the benefit of having that folks who look like them teaching them and hanging out with them, then you don't realize the benefit of that until you're actually doing it, and it's like, oh, okay, this is how.
Hmm.
I don't feel like I'm sacrificing anything as far as their education at all. I feel like they're still going to great schools, and they're getting the best of both worlds, if you will. And I would never now go back. That's
Yeah.
another thing. Now that these last 3 weeks, I wouldn't go back. Just seeing the reaction they've shown me in their faces, that how comfortable they are in being at this school, which I
Yeah.
didn't even know that was it.
Yeah. As parents, one of our first responsibilities is quality of education. But if we can have quality of education in something that represents the diversity of the nation or the world, then that's sort of win-win. But the tragedy in this is, as the young people are being bused from predominantly Latino, Black, and Brown communities into these schools that are losing enrollment because, as you said, affluency was sending their kids to private schools, but that they have to leave their community to go to another community to get the education. So while these things benefit those of certain social economic mobility, there's still this nuance and
Yeah.
complexity where if you look at low performing schools, they tend to be disproportionate young people of color. And there's a tax based dynamic to that, but there's a host of other kind of nuances. Yeah, Brad, we
So,
are getting. Go
so
ahead.
if you don't mind, Jay, how does that work then in Arizona then? Because like I know for me, I'm benefit from it. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming these kids are coming from far places to get to where I go. My kids go to school. But in Arizona, are the who's paying for that? Are they taking the tax money from their heirs and sending it over here? I mean, how's that work? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, K-12 is still it's not my dominant forte. I'm more higher
Okay.
education, but
Yeah.
this is what I know
Okay.
is hey Claude, JD Claude, how you doing, brother? The This is the dynamic. Arizona is an open enrollment, so you can go wherever you want to go. Okay, the 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 kids are largely coming from my neighborhood. They're coming from South
Okay.
Phoenix area.
Okay.
When I drive to where I work, I passed this main intersection of the South Side, 24th and Baseline, and
Yep.
you'll see a lot of kids at the bus stops. And the bus
Mm,
stops go down Baseline, and then they make that right on the 10, and then they disperse out in the Tempe and Chandler and Awatuki, and that's where they're getting their education. But they do pay a toll for that. They got to get up early,
yeah.
and then they get back late. But a lot of them are bus kids, or in the case where parents can take them, drop them off work, carpool, whatever the case may be. That's where they're coming from. But it's the bus is the city bus route. But in some cases, if a school is serious about its enrollment and it has a decline, which is tied to where they get their money from, they'll
Mm,
actually send buses into the communities to get them. So the home school doesn't have to pay for them to go somewhere else. It's the school that they're in, but there is a connection. There is a compensation model that you get money based upon the number of kids you have in the K-12 environment. So if the kids are exiting out, that's less revenue, but all parents will make a choice first about the quality of education for their children, even if it means, unfortunately, they have to travel significant miles to do it. So these families are trying to look out for their babies as well.
and the one thing I'll say to you is this: I hear what you're saying too, because the benefit that I have now, like now that my kids go to school, like literally down the street, not even a mile from my house, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of nice. I ain't got to
Oh, it's
travel.
convenient as hell.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding
Mm-hmm.
me? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if there's an issue, you forgot some or whatever. Oh, you just pop down the street, or they're sick or whatever. So the benefit of having that is a blessing, and that's something that I agree with you. I mean, that it's unfortunate that people have to travel so far in order to get the college education for their kids, because the benefit that I've had, because I've had it the other way when I was sending my kids to school over the old school, even though they could go to school over here, they chose to go to school over there, and that sucked. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even though it was 15, 20 minutes a day only to drive, but that was, that was out of my way. It was hard for me. They were late several times because I was having to, commute them over to the old school. And now
Mm-hmm.
I'm literally it takes me 2 or 3 minutes to take them to school. I mean, they could literally walk if they really wanted to, if it wasn't so hot. So
Yeah.
there's a benefit to this. So I hear what you're saying. I mean, absolutely, there's a benefit to going to school in the area that you live.
And that's how the society ought to be, where you can put your kids in schools where they live, and the populace of the school looks like the community, right?
Yeah,
And that is definitely a tragedy, certainly a discussion not for this show.
yeah,
That has racial and cultural nuances tied to it, and institutional nuances. Not the subject matter for this show, but yeah, because when I was taking my kids from the South Side to Chandler, they had their friendship base there, but then they
mhm,
had to they would leave, right? And they didn't
yeah,
have quick access, and so my baby girl in particular was just always up and down that highway just for her social outlets and circles. So yeah.
yeah.
So all right, so we're gonna only get to one last question. I'm gonna drop the comment, not the comment, but the whatever it's called, the link. If someone wants to come on, I'm not seeing much comments. So folks are listening in. We appreciate that. Love to
Mhm.
have any comments or questions or disagreements if you have them, or something you'd like for Corwin to explore or myself. We'd love your participation. If you guys are joining in, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe, share, and like. Corwin, so do we talked about this, but I want to go back to your dad, man, if I may. I
Mhm.
want to go back to your pops, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, Parents are the biggest influencer on children. Hopefully, they've led a functional life together, and the children are functional as a result of it. But sometimes we as parents are not perfect, and the kids inherit some of that energy or perception or quality of relationship. But in what ways has your relationship to your dad influenced how you raise your boys?
Oh man, that's a good question. Ah man, that's tough. I think
Positive or
before,
negative?
yeah, yeah. Okay, let's talk about the positive first. So I think in a positive way, um, because I wanted to compensate for what I didn't have, so I probably love them more. You know what I mean? I love on them more. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
dad, even though he was home for a while with me before my mom and dad got divorced, he was that traditional. He was dad, I was son, and there was not a lot of interaction, not a lot of showing of love. I think I've told you before, but now when I had my kids, I think I tell them every day that I love them every single day, no matter what the day is. We hug, we kiss, we do all that stuff that my dad, even my mom, we didn't do in our household. So for
Right.
me, that part of it, most definitely, is that part of it. And then I say, in a negative sense, I think part of the reason why they don't have the traditions that
Mm-hmm.
is because of that strained relationship. I think
Mm-hmm.
if my dad was in my life, then obviously they would know the other side, especially the down south culture I talked about
Mm-hmm.
earlier. And
Mm-hmm.
because of that relationship or lack thereof, so they've missed out on a whole part of my family, on my aunts and uncles and grandmothers and grandfathers and people down there down south that they'll never know or they haven't known because of that lack of a relationship with my father. And
Mm-hmm.
even though it's probably me at this point, I mean, I'm 53 years old, so part of it's on me now too. But
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
it's always about him. I felt like he was my father, and you need to come to me. And so, but he never did. So, so
Mm-hmm.
I think the negative part of relationship is that that has hurt my kids because they're missing out on part of their culture
Mm-hmm.
because of my strained relationship with my father.
I mean,
So,
I appreciate you sharing that, Brad. One of the themes I talk about in other shows is be the father you wish your father was, right? And no matter what relationship you have with your pops, I'm not speaking to you, Brad, I'm speaking to the entirety. But no matter which relationship you had an example. And you can choose to take that example and manifest it in your seeds, or you can choose to take it holistically, or you can acknowledge the fact that my father wasn't perfect. I'm going to put that part away. That'll never continue. And I'm going to take this. Or if it's completely estranged, you've at least had an example of what not to do, right? And then you, through your own words, talked about the reconciliation should come from elder to young, father
yeah,
to son, right?
yeah,
But at
yeah,
some point, if you look at generationally what you and I have been able to accomplish because of parents pouring and mentors, we're at a different stage of life where we see things more broadly and
yeah,
comprehensively,
yeah,
but we still have to sit with the question: should we then inverse and son go to father? I don't know. I'd be
yeah,
hypocritical. I'd be hypocritical if I said that. I never really went towards my mom with any sort of clear the air and let's just chop it up in very forthright adult to adult kind of way. So I don't want to be hypocritical about it, but my kids often ask me about their French heritage. They often
yeah,
ask me about their Algerian heritage, which is their mother.
yeah,
My mother's father was a Muslim cat from Algeria, and that history is lost. It's in my
yeah,
DNA and my heritage, but I don't have the language, the stories. I don't have that. And only my two oldest children met her because we were estranged for a couple of years there, and then she ended up transitioning, passing away. But yeah, that's lost, man. That's forever lost.
and that's sad though because I think about that as my father's getting older. Obviously, like all parents are. And you said your mom passed on, and I always like want to break that ice and be like, hey, just go down there and just show up and but it's weird though, but because part of me is like that little kid still like I'm mad about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not mad about, I'm a grown man. I'm doing my own thing, but at the same time too, I feel like you can't pick up a phone and be that father, that you want. And at this point, like my wife always says, you know what, he's not that dude. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? He just isn't. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
I can't tell you why. I don't know. I mean, you need a
You know,
psychologist.
and Brad, your success might be tied because you had that resiliency and
Yeah,
that I'm
yeah,
gonna do this on my own. I remember you very, very self-determined, self-driven, when you were going to school and beyond. And I think that tied definitely to you wanting to overcome your circumstances. But now that you're on the other side, right? We still are our father's
yeah,
sons,
yeah,
whether healthy or not. We're still our mother's
yeah,
sons.
yeah,
But I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm asking this question of both of us.
yeah,
Is there a
yeah,
time where the reconciliation may need to come
yeah.
from the younger? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
What do y'all? Hold on a second, Brett. What are y'all's thoughts in the chat there? Should over a period of time, if an older generation who may not have had as much exposure and grew up in a different time and have a certain kind of rigidity to them, if they're just not doing it because they themselves probably have fear of inadequacy, don't want to have that mirror moment, should the young person maybe take the initiative. Would love your comments there. Go ahead, Corn.
No, I
Corn.
mean, I hear you. And, I think as a matter of, just a matter of age, like I said, my father was getting up there in age. And if you want some type of reconciliation, you never know. I mean, my father's, I think, 74, 75 or something like that. It
Oh
becomes a
yeah.
point where, you know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, it didn't happen for him. Like, if I want my kids to know him and meet him at some point, it's probably have to come from me because it ain't
Mm-hmm.
gonna come from
Mm-hmm.
him. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and they always, my youngest son said to me one day, and I never forget it. He said to me, "Dad, you have a dad?" I mean, that's
Oh
what he asked.
damn.
Yeah,
Oh damn.
yeah, he asked me that.
Fred.
Yeah, he asked me that.
Oh man.
Yeah, and
Ooh, I
how
bet
did
that.
I answer that question?
How did you?
You know,
Yeah. How did you sit with
I
that?
mean, obviously, I have a dad. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
wouldn't be here otherwise. But he asked that question because he's, you know,
Mm.
yeah. He said, "Do you have a dad?" Yeah,
Wow.
true
Wow.
story. And
Well.
I didn't even know how to even answer that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yes, I do, but it's like, well, where is he? You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah. Brett, I'm
So,
sorry you had to be posed that
yeah,
question, but the fact
yeah,
that you posed that question means you were protecting something along the way. And
yeah.
that's a message to fathers, to all of us. 51% of our babies are born to single parent homes, and that impacts the seeds, man. That impacts the seeds, regardless of how successful or unsuccessful they become. And so, one of my major themes in the channel is having conversation with future fathers about protect your reproduction and produce a baby out of preparation and not necessarily passion, because life lived. Here you have Corn and I in our 50s, and this shit it impacts us, right? I will say this as a potential strategy. It could be pretty intense, but one thing technology is giving us is a little click of a box, a little click of a link, and at least we can see each other. And so sometimes being in the presence of the other human being can just be overwhelming. But maybe this technological boxes can help in that space in some way, should you choose. That's a very personal question, but at the end of the day, we are here, and if we have children, that gives us the identity of father. We're inevitably going to look back for the example that we had, good, bad, or indifferent, but be the father we wish our father was. Beautiful,
Well,
beautiful.
I'll say this last thing. I'll let you. I know we're gonna end, but I'll say this. I would rather be that person because I'll tell you this. Because I would want my kids to, for the first time, to meet my father is at his funeral. So for no other reason is for me to break that ice, having this conversation with you, is that I would want them to go to literally to a funeral and see a man that they don't know, and for the first time seeing him in the casket. And so, if for no other reason, in either in a format like this, doing a Zoom video visit with them, or seeing them in person, if it's too overwhelming otherwise. But I think that answers my own question. You know what I mean, in terms
Mm-hmm,
of where I'm at with that at this
mm-hmm,
point. My father's had some health issues, and so that been made aware of. So, I've thought about it, but I think that if for not for my benefit, but for theirs, so my son cannot ask me that question: do I
yeah,
have a father? You know what
yeah,
I'm
he'll
saying?
know. Right.
And here he is. You may not
Yeah,
know him, but I can answer that question. Here's my
yeah,
dad,
yeah,
which I've never
yeah.
had the opportunity to say that. So
Damn, Brett. Mm.
there it is, brother.
There it is, bro. I think that's the perfect way to close it out. I do want to give one last question. And Corn, if there's a question you have of me as the last question, we certainly can open it up. But hey, y'all been rocking in here with us. I see some participation levels. Appreciate you, Mulatto Vanguard and Hybrid Vigor and JD Cottle, if that's the name, if I'm saying that appropriately. If you want to get in and ask a question or give commentary, this will be about to do it. We're going to wrap this joint up. Corey, man, any last thoughts or questions for me in this space?
Yeah, just what, because on this topic, and you've had your dad obviously your whole life, and how about just asking, what's the benefit do you think you've had because you've had that special father in your life, whereas I didn't have that? How has it benefited you think in ways in terms of how you've raised your children?
Yeah, well, they say a mother can't raise a son kind of deal. Countless mothers are doing it, right? But what they're implying is that you need a father who is a man who grew up in male dynamics to transfer that to their son, right? I had that. I had that in abundance. I had that aplenty. And out of that, I never lacked mentorship. I never lacked encouragement. I never lacked undeniable support and unconditional love. right? And that shaped me. That has no doubt that shaped the kind of human being I am. And so, ironically, though, when it comes to fathering, my dad was a very caring, open, loving type of human being, right? He's a servant. That he finds a lot of power in being a servant to others. He finds personal meaning in that. My mother was a bit more standoffish, a little bit more disciplinarian, and a little bit more, uh, this because she could get tense. I actually have more of a parenting style like my mother, interestingly, to where my wife is more the nurturer, the playful kind of person, and I've been kind of the observer, constantly evaluating character, what they need to do, sometimes overkill, and that's played itself out in certain relationships with certain one of my seeds. But my dad just taught me undeniable male care, male love that I was able to introduce in certain kind of ways, but I also took from him the example of service, and much of my life lived professionally is in service to the development of other black men in particular. And so I do not know for 1 second what it's not like to have a father in my life. And so when men don't have that, I can only viscerally feel
Yeah.
as if they've lost something tremendous.
Yeah. I think you say something very powerful because I've known you. I know you've always had your father in your life. It's for other folks like me that didn't have the father in my life. Even though I have my mom, I always feel like I was missing something. And to the extent
Hmm.
that you're able to overcompensate and you move on anyways, it won't
Hmm.
let it define you. But it's something that you always feel like you didn't have what other folks had. Like I'm jealous of people who had their fathers in their lives the whole time. I never want my kids to feel like that way. I never want my kids to ever say my dad was not there for me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for me to correct that thing that happened to me, I don't want that to happen to them. I want to be there for their little league games. I want to be there for them when they're going to, girlfriend breakup or whatever the case may be. I want to be that
Hmm.
dude, be that
Hmm.
father for them. Even though for me, I didn't have that. And so I think I am not as good of a man as I could be because of that. And so I know that you have benefited from that. And I was want to get your perspective in terms of how you feel like you benefit from having your father in your life. So
Well, thank you, Corey. And my dad often asks about you, but we inherit what we inherit, but who
yeah,
we become is what we do with it. And what we do with it is steward and supported and nurtured along the way by different love sources. But man, I'm very proud of who you are, brother, man.
thank
You're
you,
doing
man.
your thing, and I'm glad that we've been able to recycle back into each other's
Yes,
lives. And I still owe
yes,
you lunch
yes.
under
Lunch and dinner now.
lunch. Yeah, yeah. You got a Vic on that joint. Corey, man, stay with me. JD, are you a part of the mastermind class? I'm looking there, and you look familiar. Your picture there with the suit. Corey, what I'm talking about is I'm a part of a mastermind class under the lead attorney. He's a masterful YouTuber, and as I get more and more involved in this, you want to learn and set at the feet of people who have some skills and success. And I think JD is a part of this mastermind community. I want to ask him if he saw the thumbnail, because the thumbnail has this circle and arrow, which presently is a trend in trying to draw eyeballs to your YouTube thumbnail, which is what they choose to click on if they see it's compelling and interesting enough. So I wonder if JD is a part of that. All right. We got some new folks coming in. Sorry. Please check us out. We got plenty of other videos. If you're drawn to the biracial theme, the parenting theme, take a look at the channels there. As I said before, if you like the content. Subscribe, share, tell some folks about it. Continue to visit us. Again, check out one of these most recent videos here. Brother Corwin, love you, brother.
Love you, man. Be good,
J4,
man. Thank you.
J4 Conversations.